All right, so let's, two pieces of housekeeping for those of us who are joining. One, we record all of our committee meetings, so this meeting is being recorded. We also do a transcript, which helps with preparing the meeting minutes. We don't send out transcripts. Please sign into chat if you are online with your name and your affiliation. That helps us keep our records for who has come to meetings. It also makes sure we spell your name right and your organization's name right. If you are on the phone, we've got one person on the phone. I will check in with you periodically to see if you want to join in, make comments, ask questions, because I can't see you raise your hand. Otherwise, if you have something you want to say, let us know in the chat. That's how we keep track of it. And with that, the other thing we need to do is open this to be FACA compliant. Gary Younger is our ADDFO, Assistant Deputy Designated Federal Officer. So Gary, kick us off.
Good morning, everybody, and Stan is not able to be here today, so I will be acting as the alternate Deputy Designated Federal Officer, and want to welcome you to today's meeting. And as a reminder, this meeting will be conducted in accordance with the requirements of the Federal Advisory Committee Act. And advisory committees have played an important role in shaping programs and policies of the federal government. The Hanford Advisory Board's role is to provide policy-level advice and recommendations concerning EM site-specific issues, such as cleanup activities and environmental restoration, waste and nuclear materials management and disposition, excess facilities, future land use and long-term stewardship, risk management, and communications. And I appreciate your attendance today. Look forward to the Hanford Advisory's BCC development and submission of constructive, actionable policy level advice on Hanford cleanup. There we go. Thanks, everybody. Let's get to work.
There you go. Sounds like a plan. Right.
So just so you all know, I have a colleague who facilitates who does this very well. Sometimes I'm looking at you because I have multiple computers going to keep track of documents. So when I'm looking over there, it's not because I'm reading the funny papers. It's because I have more than one computer going. I keep forgetting to tell people that. It probably looks really weird. Tom, do you want to go over the agenda or do you want me to? It's totally up to you.
I'd like you to, but first I'd like to make a quick message announcement here that Emmett cannot join us today. He was in the middle of training and could not get out of that, so we'll be missing his presence today. But I see we have about 5, from my count, about 5 members of the BCC on board with us today, and that's good. So Ruth, yeah, please take us through.
All right, so we've got 2 documents for you to approve. One is a meeting summary that predates the current facilitation team. The other are meeting minutes that from August. We just need to catch up on the paperwork. We're going to talk about elections for chair and vice chair of this committee. It's listed as nominations. You will have the choice whether to conduct your elections today or delay that for some period of time, but we will take nominations today. I currently have none that have been sent in. And then we'll make sure we check in if there are announcements to make. The bulk of the meeting is going to be spent looking at the draft advice on cleanup priorities. We have a document that you don't have. Got a little bit of an echo. That is a compilation of input that we have collected this week from PIC, RAP, and tanks. So we'll go through that and reconcile those things, get ready for the next iteration of IM teamwork. Tom's going to give a quick introduction to the life cycle report And then we have time for questions on the HAB membership packet. This has been an item on everybody's agenda, so we may be down to just questions instead of more presentation from Gary and committee business about things moving forward. And we're scheduled to break at 12 noon. Questions about what we're gonna try to accomplish today? Anyone? So with that, I think we can do some, one of the documents is a meeting summary and one is meeting minutes, and that has to do with the standards we were working with on the prior contract versus the current contract. So are we ready to do that, Tom?
Yes, yes. Let's see if there are any comments to those minutes and move forward if or approve if we can.
So I'm asking you to remember exactly a year ago. Okay, that's just a little weird. I missed that. This is a meeting summary from your meeting a year ago.
Yeah, it is a little confusing when you look at the date of the file. You're thinking, how can we have the minutes before we even have the meeting today?
Well, you are last year.
Yeah.
Are there any comments or corrections for any of you that actually remember that meeting?
I think we've moved along well beyond that one. I think I've read through the meeting minutes in detail and they look good to me.
So if that is because we can accept those and move on to the August.
Yeah, if anyone has any comments, please raise them. I think the minutes have been very detailed and very good from the facilitation team, and I think they capture them. When we have comments to them, they've been responded to, so I appreciate that.
Okay, let's look at August. Yeah, this is August. These were generated by the current facilitation team. Any comments on the August minutes? Should have sent you all coffee this morning. Are there any objections to adopting these and getting these posted on Hanford.gov?
Let's do it.
Okay. All right. So next up are elections. Each of the committees has done it slightly differently, which is kind of the committee prerogative. Normally, HAB committees elect chair and vice chair for the calendar year in the February-March timeframe. So leadership is calendar year, not fiscal year. Tom, how do you want to do this?
Yeah, I was in 2 of the previous 3 discussions this week on the committee elections, and I do personally support, and I'd like your comments too. I do support the approach taken in the PIC meeting on Monday, which was to begin taking nominations today and through the period between today and our next meeting, which is hopefully going to be in April during a committee week meeting, and have the elections in the April BCC meeting at that time. a couple reasons. One is PIC had a long discussion about that, and that I participated in as well. Also, Emmett, who's serving as vice chair, is not with us today, and I would appreciate him being involved with this. So my feeling is people need, the team members need some time to think about, because they may not have yet thought about nominations or their own interests in running for chair and vice chair. So I'd appreciate them spending that time and either self-nominating or having someone else nominate your name with your approval or consent. That way the process will work through more smoothly, even though it's delayed by a month or so. I would prefer that, but I'd like to hear your comments as well.
Thoughts? Anyone?
The PIC approach makes sense to me, particularly with the packets in transit, I guess, is how you'd say it.
Gary?
Yes, thank you. I also do want to remind you that Emmett's term ends June 30th. He's in a term limited spot, which is completely different from the term limits that are being that's the new standard now. So that'll also be a consideration.
Thanks for mentioning that, Gary. Yeah, that is an item, and we'll talk about that a little later in the meeting today, hopefully, about the term limits. Although we won't get into great detail, but that is an issue. But again, per the PIC discussion, and I think it was fairly substantially covered. I think they have decided also that whatever they do to elect somebody, if it turns out that whoever is falling out of the window for approval of a membership, they can handle that at a later time. If that occurs, then we'd have to address it at that time. So I would suggest that while it's a good suggestion, Gary, and an important issue, I would suggest that we worry about the election and nomination cycle first, and then if that occurs, we can deal with it later. Thank you for that.
From a process standpoint, committee week is the week of April 10th, which means we would be getting out information for that meeting the week of March 27th, the last week of March. So I would ask that nominations come in by like the 25th of March. We will double check with anybody nominated to make sure they're willing to serve. You can nominate yourself, you can nominate somebody else, but we don't voluntold people. We actually ask if they wish to serve.
That'd be great.
So send your nominations to the HAB account, hab@slin.net. Josh, Olivia, and I all have access to that account, so it's the fastest way to get a response from us.
Are there any objections from the membership on that approach? Sending in nominations to Ruth by March 25th or earlier, and going from there. I think it makes sense.
And if you are newer and have questions about what on earth does a chair do, feel free to ask Tom, to ask the facilitation team, to ask Gary. We can help you sort of scope out, what does that to-do list look like?
Very good. Okay.
Announcements. Tom, you and Gary had an announcement about upcoming comment period?
Yeah, Gary, I may have been confused a bit on my comment back to Ruth on this earlier in the draft agenda, but I had understood that there was a public comment period coming up on the life cycle cost scope schedule cost. Is that imminent? Do you know? Or is that even an item.
Let me check that. I'm not certain on the life cycle. I know that it's been released to the public, and there was a story in last week's Tri-City Herald. I do understand that there is a cleanup priorities public meeting. It will be either March 15th or 16th, and I will check on that. I think the plans are still being finalized for that. It'll be one of those 2 days.
Oh, okay. That is earlier than usual then.
Yes, much earlier. So I think it's mostly what we discussed back in December. I'm not privy to all of that because I don't work in the public portion of public involvement, so I don't have firsthand knowledge. But I think it's going to be fairly similar to what we've already released, with anything else that the White House has approved for release.
Okay. Well, that sounds good. I like the idea that it's earlier in the cycle so that we have, in fact, it's almost, it's at the same time actually as the HAB meeting, isn't it? No, it's 23rd. March 23rd is our HAB meeting, I believe.
Right.
So
So this will be about the week before.
Right. Okay. Good. There was, I think that was the only other item that I thought we needed to discuss on the announcements, Ruth. I'm okay with that.
I'm going to put a link to the public involvement calendar here in the chat in case folks need that. Man, my lag is... I've got a lag between the computers on my desk.
Can you show that up again real quick that you just had on the screen?
Oh, yeah.
I saw the life cycle item quickly flash through my mind, at least.
I don't think it was on here. This is what we went over at the PIC meeting. Oh, yeah, we did.
Yeah, the second item.
Yeah.
So what is the dates for that then?
Right now, there is not a public meeting scheduled for that. According to this, and that is what they said on Monday.
Oh. Okay.
Yeah, comment period, but not a public meeting.
And when's the comment period is what, beginning of March to mid-April? I can't read.
Life cycle scope and schedule. I'm sorry, Ruth, go ahead.
So according to this, the comment period for the life cycle report is February 15th through April 15th.
Okay. Okay. So in fact, our meeting in April for BCC of the week of April 10th is pretty much right at the end of the comment period. So if we have this as an agenda item, it's still appropriate and we can still submit comments at that time. So I think that still fits.
Right.
That's good. Thank you.
And Anna has put a link to that report in the chat for those of you who haven't found it yet and want some light reading.
By the way, I still have the problem with not having the chat. So, but since I'm on the camera in this meeting, it's not an issue. I'll have to work with Ruth and Josh to try to figure that out.
I have to beat up your computer too.
Okay, thanks.
Chris, what's on your mind?
I also posted the life cycle report in Teams. So if you go to files on Teams, you'll see it at the top of the files that have been posted on Teams.
Okay, great. Thank you for doing that. It's available then for anyone that can access those information.
Right. And if you do not have access to the BCC committee piece of our Teams account for the HAB, let Josh and I know. It's easy to add you. It's just a place where you can have conversations between meetings. You can upload documents, share opinions, answer questions, whatever you need to do. Each IM team also has its own space in the Hanford Teams account so that folks can do asynchronous conversations and documents. So if you're new and need a little help, let us know. We'd be happy to plug you in the right place.
Great.
All right, you ready for draft advice?
I am. Let's jump into this.
All right. Is this big enough? I wish it were bigger.
Okay. Just to summarize really quickly, while Ruth is trying to make it more readable if we can, the three committees already, the PIC, RAP, and Tanks met this week. We, either myself or Chris in the Tank Waste Committee case, went over a quick summary. We only had 30 minutes in each of those meetings, but we did go over the summary and primarily went over the action table list for cleanups, and that's part of this. And got comments, and Ruth and Josh incorporated those comments largely in this file that we're going to be looking at today. So we have the benefit of getting the inputs from those committees already here in this version. What's not shown in this version is the changes between our first IM team meeting and the incorporation of the IM team comments. They're already in here from that first IM team meeting. So you've already, well, this is for the BCC now, and some members that are with us on the BCC are not IM team members, so you may be only seeing this for the first time. So I'll kind of cover this in some detail, but we're going to spend most of the time on the action list as well. So the first, we have three identified references here, typical, and the format, by the way, is very similar to last year's format, which was well received by the TPA agencies. And so we kept that generally that same format. This year, the three references, of course, have changed a bit, but they're similar. The first was last year's consensus advice. The second was the latest 5-year plan from DOE. And in this case, it's the draft that was presented to us, to the HAB and to the public on October 20th last year. That's the latest one we have. And third was a letter sent to summarize those public comments from the October 20th meeting to the TPA agencies. And there's a link included in that. Since there's not a good reference to it, we put in the link to that letter that you can find the letter if you need to. So the background is fairly straightforward. Again, I won't go through the details. I'll try to point to the main highlights. If you go down a little bit, let's hold that for a second, Ruth. The same three categories that were used last year in the 5-year plan by DOE is again used this year. That's tank waste cleanup, Central Plateau cleanup, and River Corridor cleanup. We used those last year as categories for establishing our cleanup priorities, and in fact, we did that this year as well. The next paragraph, we changed a bit primarily on the title. Instead of adding the topic called cross-cutting activities, which was last year, we changed the title, but the information in that fourth category is very similar. We call it indirect and supporting activities. So you'll see 4 categories in the table we'll go over today, and those are the 4 categories that we'll be covering. Again, last year we did the critical versus important designation on the items to try and delineate priorities for DOE, because DOE was very interested in having the HAB's input on how they can distinguish one item from another in our long list of items that we typically provide in these advices. So we use those two, we continue to use those two designators, critical versus important. The next paragraph is an important one this year, starting with the during the board's October, yeah, that's the one. During the October 20th meeting, we asked the question to Brian Vance as to whether or not he thought it was a good idea to broaden the scope of the cleanup priorities advice each year, to instead focus instead of focusing on the formulation budget year, which is the current fiscal year +2, which is the year that DOE is submitting their budget to cover. This year, they're going to be submitting a budget sometime this summer. to DOE headquarters. And that is to cover the budget in fiscal 2024. So typically, our advice in this series of advices has focused on that formulation year, fiscal year +2. Brian indicated, yeah, he thought it might be a good idea to broaden the scope of this to include the entire scope of the 5-year plan for DOE. So it's directly consistent, if you will. But for these reasons, the IM team and I think the other committees did not have an objecting opinion to this. The IM team felt that there's an advantage in focusing on that 1 year. And it really, we listed 3 of them here. And we may want to, particularly the IM team may want to look at these 3 and summarize them a bit. But the main one is the third one to me. And that is this approach, the approach of broadening the scope of the cleanup priorities advice. That approach would seem to lessen the focus on DOE to complete cleanup activities as planned on a fiscal by fiscal year basis. So because a number of our items in the table represent an acceleration of activities for DOE beyond what is shown in the 5-year plan. And we wanted to make sure we distinguish that and say, well, you talked about completing transfer of WESIF capsules, for example, in 2025. We really think this is a critical item. We think that needs to be done in 2024. So instead of trying to explain that each item that this occurs in is an acceleration, and this is equivalent to what the DOE plan says or not, we would prefer to keep it as one fiscal year focus basis. Any comment on that offhand from the BCC team?
I have Esteban's hand up. Esteban, what's on your mind?
Yes, thank you, Ruth. And I got to give credit to Gary Younger for reminding me of my expertise you've forgotten. And, in this week trend, the thing that keeps out standing out for me, as I worked with USDA, APHIS, and the Census Bureau, that I'm part of the field team. I think, and like Tom mentioned, I think yesterday was the comment I made about, reviewing it like every year, especially congressional years, because when the fiscal budget comes out, you kind of plan ahead, but then in our case, and I think all the work that like the HAB does and what happens in the field, that sometimes, accidents happen, things are going to happen, but, sometimes, our political leaders see the public's consideration, and sometimes it's, taken to like that comment about, I think that was made yesterday about what's an emergency, right? So I think in this and trying to come up with the budgets and everything, I think it's good to kind of like what Tom said, kind of keeping it to the fiscal year, because things change, right? And especially I think in this situation where technology is new, things are happening, and I think everybody's got their eye out on like the cleanup, that things are going to happen, and hopefully people have that self-awareness or our conscience that things are going to happen and expenses that are going to come up.
That's a good point, Esteban, and they do often come up that way. One thing we do have a recognition of that in part is the first paragraph on advice, but I don't get to there yet because we're still talking about the 3 bullets. But there's a sentence added that says if this table of prioritized activities for fiscal 2024 does not include any items that are supposed to be finished earlier. And if they're not finished, then those items should be added to the table by DOE as a priority item to be completed in 2024. So we tried to address it that way for slippage of activities, but those things do occur for sure. Thank you. Any other comments on the approach for fiscal year by fiscal year basis items?
I've got Max from Oregon.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me on your BCC committee here. I appreciate it. I don't disagree with the approach, and I think Esteban has good points there. And I would agree with. I actually have a question: is does this committee or does the HAB overall also independently provide advice around that 5-year plan, like perhaps a separate advice point or a separate recommendation? If we're only looking at year by year advice, that's important, but there also might be a second need to look beyond and look at that 5-year plan and think about what's coming up in the future.
Yes, that's also a very good point, Max. We reference 3 of this particular advice draft references the summary of public comments that were made in October 20th at the meeting where DOE presented the draft, latest draft plan for the 5-year plan. Unfortunately, my understanding is that those comments will be addressed by DOE in the next 5-year plan, which means next September or October. I would really like, in fact, Gary may want to comment on this. I would really like to see an approach where we see the draft 5-year plan a bit earlier to the public, to the HAB and the public, so we can comment on it in time before that 5-year plan is completed for that year. That would be the most effective and efficient. But right now, I think DOE's position is that the comments we submitted in reference 3 to them will be addressed or considered in the next 5-year plan at the end of this year. Gary, is that fair to say?
Well, the 5-year plan never really gets out of draft phase. And what I mean by that is we present the plan that we did each year, and then we have to factor in budgets and conditions on the ground and other factors that we can't necessarily predict, such as supply chain impacts, COVID, workforce availability, things like that. So the ink never really gets dry on the plan, and then each year we update it. So that it really stays in a draft form. I understand what you're saying, but this is also helpful as part of the formulation for that plan. So I could take the question back, see if we can get some calendars moved a little bit, but like I said, the plan pretty much is always going to be a draft.
So Max, the short answer to your question is yes, the HAB through its process can give advice on individual cleanup priority years as well as longer term 5-year or 10-year plans. It's a matter of having a sponsoring committee and an IM team and doing it, and timelines and deadlines.
Okay, appreciate that. Thank you.
Chris.
Okay.
As I remember some of the comments in that letter, there was a lot of energy about the fact that the public really, including the Hanford Advisory Board, really had not had an opportunity to take part in the formulation of the draft. The draft comes out, we see it, and that's that. We can respond to it after the fact, but we haven't really had a chance to be involved in formulation of that draft of the 5-year plan. And I believe, Tom, and if I'm not right, correct me, but I believe there are a number of comments on that in that letter that we sent.
Yes, there are, for timing, the timing of the availability to comment on the 5-year plan. That's right. Okay. Yes, please. There are 3 paragraphs here on the advice. The first one we talked about briefly, that if any item is not finished as planned right now before the formulation year 2024, then DOE is expected to add that to the list of the tabled priority list below. The second paragraph is very similar to the wording from last year in that we recognize that there are many activities at Hanford requiring completion that are minimum safe conditions, to maintain minimum safe conditions, and also critical maintenance activities. If a piece of equipment is critical to the functionability of a facility, that has to be addressed immediately if it goes down. This paragraph is representing that we understand that there are a number of things that fall into this category. For DOE, we did not, and we are not addressing each one of those in the tabled cleanup priorities below. But we fully support DOE doing those. And the reason that's important is they take a substantial portion of each year's Hanford cleanup budget. So out of a $2.5 billion budget for RL and ORP combined, upwards of a third has been reported in the past of being used for these kind of activities. So that just draws down money that we can actually use for cleanup. But we know that it's important. So we're saying it's important. You got to do it. We support you doing it. And that's what that main paragraph says there. And the third paragraph there, I want to highlight that because, and it was in similar wording, it was done last year and several previous years as well. We really encourage each of the 3 TPA agencies to respond to this advice, not just DOE. It's addressed to all 3, the heads of DOE, ecology, and EPA. And we emphasize here that we really appreciate the response from all 3 of them, not just, and of course also DOE, but not just DOE in this case. I don't think there's much.
Can I just jump in here? I'm sorry if I'm breaking protocol. This is Max again. Did you get a response from EPA or ecology on last year's
No.
recommendations?
No, not that I recall. Ruth, I think that's fair to say, and then I'd have to look at the.
Let me double check real quick, but I think that is correct. So if you go to hanford.gov, outreach, and then the HAB tab, there's a place where we keep all of the advice letters and all the responses. And sometimes responses are DOE. Sometimes all 3 agencies will sign a single response. That happened, for example, on the advice about virtual public meetings. And sometimes they'll respond individually, like they did on the ZCRIBS advice. But 309, which was the last year's budget advice, only DOE responded.
Okay. If there's no other comments, I apologize for not being able to see the chat either. I'm not ignoring you.
Yeah, no, that's all right. Gary's got his hand up.
Okay.
Gary?
And to further clarify on Max's question, before DOE responds, we do let our TPA partners know what we are going to respond, and whether they are signatories to the response or not, we do accept input and comments. So, and there are certain pieces of advice that are to all 3 agencies that all 3 agencies will respond either individually or as a collective. So as Ruth mentioned, if you go to the outreach, you can see a compendium of those various responses. And this is one that we work with our TPA partners with.
Oh.
Thanks, Gary.
I put the link in chat that'll take you right to that page of advice and responses. It's actually now about 3 or 4 pages because the HAB has issued like 310 pieces of advice. So it's a lot. There's a lot there.
Okay. Let's look at the table, Ruth. Again, for the folks, particularly the folks that are new to the HAB and new to the VCC, this format that you see in the table is the same format as we used last year because it was fairly well received by the TPA agencies, and I think it was fairly clear in terms of what we were recommending as a HAB. Just very briefly, the 3 columns, the items were identified without numbers, but instead with a letter designation, because we did not want people to think or to even subconsciously think that these were in order of priority, sequential priority, because the only priorities are the second column, and that shows critical versus important. Those are the only two designations we use. So for tank waste cleanup, which is the first category here, the tank waste items are TW for tank waste dash A, B, C, D, and so forth. And that's the way it goes for each of the categories. The description in each of these is a brief statement, because we really didn't feel that it was important to get into detail on this. DOE knows the detail of the item. The HAB in general knows the details of the item as low as we need to go in that knowledge. And we wanted to highlight that in general, the cleanup or the completion of that function is what was important, not the 10 things that go into finishing it so much. So these are summary activities that we think fit the bill. So the first two, DF law, of course, is a critical one. Operate DF law and increase throughput to reach full capacity in fiscal 2024. Now, this is expected to start earlier than that. In fact, the TSCR has already started, which is great news. And the actual processing into glass of that material is not yet started. It's supposed to start, as I recall, again in 2023. But we're wording this to make sure we continue operation and improve operation to increase the throughput to full capacity. That's the focus on that. Again, stop me, Ruth, or if somebody comes into chat or has a comment verbally. The evaporator, I saw, I'm not sure, I can't recall where this one came from, the comment. Will this be done in 2024? Mission very small if DF law is not operating. I'm not sure I agree with that comment, because ultimately, my understanding is the evaporator is going to be very important for processing all of the waste ultimately. So are we not needing that as a critical part of the tank waste treatments? I guess that's a general question.
I think it came from Rob. Oh, Josh, help me. My meetings are running together in my brain.
That came from Jacob Reynolds yesterday.
Oh.
It came from Rob, but it's supposed to be done by 2023. It's in the 2022 to 2026 work plan. It's supposed to be done by 2023. And as you noted, Tom, we left it in here to ensure that it would get done and not fall by, not slip a little bit. We want to urge them to keep going, make sure it's done.
Okay, so you want to
2023.
So you want to? Are you recommending, Chris, that we leave the words that are highlighted yellow, leave the words themselves in there, as opposed to the comment? Okay.
Yeah. I
don't like the question mark, but I would suggest we'll change the words to say this is expected to be done by 2024. So take out, reword that first part of that yellow, but I don't know if we want to say mission is very small if DF law is not operating.
So let me clarify, the comments that are highlighted in yellow were things that I picked out of the conversations in other committees. We did not wordsmith those comments. I mean, it literally was trying to capture the flavor of the conversation, not make the next jump to what words. So you'll lose your mind if you try to wordsmith my interpretation.
Okay, good point. Let's leave it in for now then as is, and we can deal with it in the IM team. But well, however we reword or address that, I think we're still okay with having the evaporator as critical, are we not?
I think
there was agreement with that.
Okay.
Yeah, and you'll notice as we go through, some of the comments do have questions because they're sort of clarifying things.
Right.
So yeah, don't wordsmith the notes. That will hurt your brain.
Okay, that sounds good. Our brains are already early.
I've
TW,
got
yeah,
people like you.
well, yeah. Chris, you were identifying these next to the tank leak detection and the leaking SST closure as being commented on yesterday.
There weren't really any comments on TWC. The only thing is I'm looking at the tank farm leak advice. And they have in there, they call it a single shell tank leak detection, characterization, mitigation, cleanup, and communication plan. So I'm wondering whether we should put, to be consistent, have single shell tank leak detection, characterization, mitigation, cleanup, and communication plan.
Okay, that's fair. So instead of on TWC, Ruth, can you note to take out the tank word and put SST is my suggestion. Single shell tank. It's going to be too long.
Well, it's spelled out as single shell tank in their advice.
That's okay. My opinion would be that this is a long title, and we have to be consistent. We don't necessarily have to be identical to the title myself. I guess we can. I don't care. We can spell it out. Leave it in for now, and we can address that later, Ruth.
Yeah, no, we'll just. So I'm thinking for today, capturing comments from the committee like we've done for the other committees, and then letting the IM team do the actual wordsmithing and cleaning it up.
Yes, that's right. That's
I
right.
think that'll be slightly less painful for the group on this call.
For sure. Okay.
Matt.
Yeah, thanks everybody. I guess it was actually a process question, more like you. Are we the fourth committee to look at this document? Is that?
Yeah, the IM team was first, of course, because they're the ones that developed and took a first cut at the rough draft. Then, because of the schedule of committee week, which was pick first on Monday, wrap on Tuesday, tanks on Wednesday. Now we're Thursday. That's the normal schedule for committee week scheduling. So therefore, we took those advantage times and talked to them first for 30 minutes. It was a fairly brief overview. But yes, we are therefore the fourth committee, but we have an hour and a half to do this, and because we want to get in detail with the BCC.
Okay, thank you very much.
So the other process thing, Max, this is a little unusual. Normally, a committee creates an IM team, the IM team does its homework, drafts whatever, and it comes back to just that sponsoring committee before going to the full board. This piece of advice, it's the one piece of advice that the HAB has done every year for almost all of its existence. And so because it cross-cuts all of the committees, we actually put it on all the committee agendas to get that input. That's not normal for other pieces of advice. It's a quirk of money and cleanup priorities.
Yeah, thanks for that, Ruth. And it feels like it should be a priority document for all the committees in the HAB as a full, right? I mean, seems like the big piece of advice, if I can say that, right?
Yeah,
Right.
It's the annual thing. The other thing is that the IM team, even though it's sponsored by the BCC, it actually has members from all of the HAB committees to feed into it. So it's a little bit different in the how we do it. So you're cutting your teeth on the unusual piece of advice.
That's good. That's good. Thank you very much.
Okay, are we D and E, or we have a comment in here that Ruth captured about retrieval or not closure? Is this the one, Chris, that you addressed yesterday with TWC?
Yeah. Well, there were no comments on the item itself. It doesn't appear in the link in the tank leak advice anywhere. And what does appear are two items that we could add to our advice or replace this one. I asked specifically if people thought it was doable to initiate retrieval activities for SST known to be leaking. Like, should they start leaking in the future? And I really didn't get an answer. But item F in the tank leak, which we could have, says allocate budget for managing SST links. And then it goes on from there. So that's a possibility that we could put in place of the words here. The other possibility that we could consider is their advice number 1, which says the board believes that agencies should remove liquid waste, including the interstitial liquids, from the SSTs as soon as possible before they have a chance to leak into the environment, contaminating the water table and potentially the Columbia River. So that and what I just said in item F are similar in some regards to what we say, and those are possibilities that we might want to consider.
So
But I
process,
didn't get a no. I didn't get a no on what we have.
correct. There was not a no on that. There was a concern from ecology about point number 1 in the draft advice from Jeff Lyon. There is not agreement on the money component in the tank leak advice. At least there was an agreement yesterday. And Bob Suyama, who is the chair of the tanks committee, is on this IM team. So my process recommendation is to work that in the IM team, because what's behind these yellow notes is a little deeper technically than this committee normally goes into.
I agree with that. I think Bob is going to have to weigh in with his position for his committee on that, and I appreciate Chris's review of this too. I think that those two items, it looks like this is tied to D and E mainly.
Now, the yellow thing there is a comment from Liz, and she was just concerned about consistency. She wondered, instead of leaking SST closure, should it be leaking SST retrieval? Because we say initiate retrieval activities. And for E, should it be SST retrieval? Because we say complete retrieval activities. So her comment on D is wordsmithing for consistency with the words in the following text.
Okay. Okay, I don't think we can come to ground on that here. We'll have to address that in the IM team call, unless there are other comments from the BCC here.
So yeah. So I mean, I think sharing the comments from other committees makes sense. I think resolving comments from other committees is better in the IM team and not with the full BCC, because we don't have those representatives from those other committees to give you the depth.
Yeah, I agree with that, Ruth. On that TWD, for example, I do see an inconsistency. The title that Chris is talking about mentions closure, but the first sentence says initiate retrieval. So really, there is, I guess we do have to do some rewording on that. And the other issue overall and how we want to address it to be consistent with tank wastes. We can cover. Well, I think what we'll do, what I might do is suggest that Bob take a look at these 3 or so items before the IM team committee and make a recommendation from his committee. That way we'll go into the IM team with some concrete suggestion. Okay. Okay. I guess we're up to TWF then. We're into the important items now as opposed to critical for tank waste. The WTP item is meant to say, this is not, WTP high-level waste classification is not going to be operable till right now 2036. I mean, it's a long time off yet. But we want to make sure that we keep this in focus to have us prepared to meet that date. So this says, kind of in broad wording, continue design and construction supporting those activities, the milestone activity, meaning whatever it is currently 2035 or 36, depending on how it's worded. But we want to make sure the DOE's focus continues to focus on that and just not say, oh, DFLAW started the waste, it's great, we're running now, we're processing waste, and kind of lose track of the upfront work that is absolutely required for the high level waste. So that's why it's there, and that's why it's only important as opposed to critical.
And there were
East-West.
no comments on that yesterday.
Okay, good. And on the east-west transfer line, I can't read the comment in my screen there, Ruth, but on the side, but I think there was a comment about, is this needed because DFLAW is now operating or something?
Not on east-west transfer line.
Oh, okay. Okay, that's, I misremembered there. Okay, that we may have solved that problem before, I can't recall. So that line, that transfer line is to connect 2 east and 2 west tank farms so that they can all feed ultimately waste to the high level tanks and or to the processing. I'm sorry, to the high level waste processing activities. So we've always thought that it was important. Right now, DOE to operate DFLAW, my understanding is they don't need that transfer line, but it is important to maintain and to have operable for the rest of the mission. Tank vapors, Chris, did you get any comments from the Tank Waste Committee on that yesterday?
No, I just reiterated your comment that we're going to check with Becky on the status of that. And
yeah,
with HSEP, and there were no comments.
Okay, that's fine. That is a safety related issue. Becky is the chair of the HSEP committee, and she's a member of the IM team. So we will get that clarified in the next IMT meeting. Additional tank storage is an item that the HAB has pushed for quite some time. DOE has resisted for good reason. Their reasoning is that they don't want to spend tons of money and tons of resources building new storage tanks when their analysis currently shows that if things go as planned, we'll have enough space to transfer waste back and forth and ultimately until they're processed to glass. So we don't really need a new tank. Our concern from the HAB is, but we continue to have tank leaks and they're going to get worse instead of better. And therefore we feel at least the design and permitting activities should be funded so that if one is ultimately needed or near term needed, that we'll have a better shot at being able to put something together physically for a tank. That's the purpose of that item.
Max, what's on your mind?
Yeah, Tom, thank you for that explanation. I was going to ask kind of a similar question around that tank storage. From my knowledge, I understand that it's a controversial topic, right? That there's different opinions on whether tank storage is needed or if the money should be spent, right? DOE has a position and perhaps ecology has another position. It wasn't quite clear when I first read that Tom, what you described, that it's only about design and permitting, but not actual construction. Although I see the word options is here, does, I guess, imply that it's not construction of activities, but just to be ready if it's decided to do so. I guess even more of a process question about this. This is one of the items that I think is under negotiations, right, on the TPA holistics. How does that play into the advice here? I mean, what if it comes out and all the TPA agencies say, you know what, we agree, we don't need additional tank storage right now. I don't know if that's the case or not, probably not. But how might the TPA holistic negotiation play into the advice that the HAB issues?
Well, Gary might be able to answer this better than I. My only input to that is we know the holistic negotiations are going on. We haven't, as a HAB, we haven't seen what milestones are being discussed. And so I don't know if this is part of that or not. Gary, do you have a feel for that?
I don't at this time because just like you, I'm waiting for a readout on that. It's kind of an unknown on what impacts it may or may not have. So I've got nothing to add.
Okay.
Fair enough. I think I'm just trying to figure out my way about how HAB this advice in particular might align with TPA milestones that are being negotiated right now. And it's tricky, isn't it? If there's work behind closed doors that nobody on this call has any information about, we're just doing the best we can, it seems like. So
We
Thanks,
kind of
everybody.
don't even know what we don't know.
Right.
Chris.
Yeah.
There was a little bit of discussion on this yesterday. This item does not appear in the latest five-year plan. And I wasn't sure where it came from other than HAB Advice 298. And Bob Suyama weighed in, and, he's the chair of the Tank Waste Committee. And he said that it should definitely remain in there, that it was a hot item in the Tank Waste Committee regard, and that we should leave it as it was. And that was the only real comment that appeared yesterday.
I seem to recall Susan Leckman, she's the vice chair of the committee, saying that one concern was it takes so long to design and permit a new tank that part of her concern was having some of that back end work done in the event the space was actually needed, because you can't just say, okay, we're going to build one in a year. It doesn't go that fast if you decide you need one.
Well, that's right. And that's why I think Bob said that it's good to leave it in here, like for 2024, to complete design and permitting. And that, if that in fact happens, that would address, Susan's concern about the length of time it takes.
Right. Yeah, Bob has been, and TWC, the Tank Waste Committee, has been very supportive of this kind of activity for sure. Let's move on to Central Plateau, if we could. WESIF is a critical item. There's been a lot of talk about this. There's even I think I saw a presentation during the RAP meeting, at least a portion of it that I saw. The DOE has put together an animated version of WESIF transfer, construction of the pad, and the transfer of capsules from wet storage to the dry storage pad. Critical item for us, a high level of radiation involved here, and it is a safety related issue. I don't think there's been any comments to change this. I think it's important to accelerate as much as we can.
Well, there was actually quite a bit of discussion on this, but not about the wording as it says. Richard Bloom had a fair bit to say, voiced a number of concerns, or his concern, about the effect of high radiation on the stability or the deterioration of the concrete pad. So he had some concern about how long were these capsules going to be there, and could radiation going through the steel deteriorate the concrete such that you'd have to do something with the capsules due to deterioration of the basin. And I think that's what his comments are, and I made some notes on that. He would like to see somewhere a plan for evaluation of the concrete, the high radiation exposure of high radiation. But it didn't address this itself. It's just some ancillary comments that he made that he wanted to see perform somewhere along the line.
Chris, I wasn't in that discussion, but I have some concerns also about deterioration of concrete in general, not just for the casks that are holding the west of capsules or just the Key West Basin, but concrete in general. And maybe we should, Ruth, can you make a note on the side under Central Plateau to a comment that we might, as in the IM team, want to address an item, adding an item on investigation and of concrete deterioration studies.
Right. So that's already here because
Oh,
we put it in during the RAP meeting. And I'm gonna nag you all again. Right now, we've only got a couple people speaking, and we want to get the comments from BCC on this document and let the IM team adjudicate the individual comments from other committees, or you're going to bog yourself down.
okay, good point. Thank you. Okay, we already got it. It's covered. Let's go back to the next item then is pump and treat. It's a critical item. The pump and treat has worked great as far as I think everyone is concerned to mitigate the radioactive leakage into the soils around the site. And we're talking about expanding it to the items that are mentioned, BP5 and PO1. And I think, Chris, you can probably confirm this. I think that these are the ones that are identified specifically on the 5-year plan for fiscal 2024. Do you recall?
It's sort of disappeared in this year's 5-year plan, I think. But when Naomi gave her review of groundwater monitoring at the last board meeting, she said that she considered that in her opinion, the most critical item with respect to groundwater was groundwater beneath the Central Plateau, and in particular 200 East. So I think keeping this in here would be good, and it is consistent with the fact that they've just now got the interim rods for it, records of decision. So they'll have to be going out with the remedial action work plan if they haven't already for those records of decision, and it will be pump and treat and taking it all to the 200 West pump and treat facility. So I think it's good to keep it in here.
Okay.
And there were no comments from the RAP committee on this.
Okay, good. Okay, so let's skip over the quickly, I guess I'd say, not skip over the next two. CWC is Central Waste Complex. We had a similar item last year, and we continue to say set and meet the deadlines to make sure that we're prepared to ship the mixed and the high-level waste off and the hazardous waste off-site. So this whole issue about the Central Waste Complex is a critical one for a number of people on the HAB and their organizations. We wanted to highlight it here again. There's no real specifics there other than the keep the work going at the fastest pace you can. ERDF support. You can see the words are about conduct soil remediation so that we don't require clean fill to support it. This, I don't recall if this was an item last year or not, but it is added here at least to be sure that ERDF is critical to the cleanup of Hanford. Environmental restoration and disposal facility is, I think, the correct acronym there, the definition. And that is where everything that we're cleaning up at Hanford, other than what's being sent off site as high level or mixed waste, mixed hazardous waste, everything else, low level waste and construction waste and everything else is going to go into ERDF. So ERDF is a key facility at Hanford.
All right, Max.
Thanks again for entertaining my questions. On CPC, does the phrasing around indoors and outdoors, what's the meaning of that? Why is that significant?
It's Central Waste Complex.
Yeah, it just struck me as it must mean something to bother putting indoors or outdoors.
My understanding, Max, is that there is waste currently stored at the Central Waste Complex, both outdoors into the environment and also indoors. And I don't know the distinction between the two. If someone else does, please mention it.
I could probably ask somebody
It's
else.
outdoors on a pad and it's indoors. There's not enough, I understand that there's not enough room in CWC to store all the waste that they'd like to have. So some of it is stored outside on a pad. And it may be a characterization thing that they can't take all the waste outside in the pad and characterize it in time and keep it inside before they move it. So there's a space issue as I understand it.
Thank you.
Okay. And someone can remind me again. I'm sorry, I just can't get the RAWP acronym together.
Remedial Action Work Plan.
Oh, there you go. It should be simple enough. We identify these acronyms at the bottom of the table, but I just can't recall what that was. So we have mentioned this one consistent with the schedules outlined for that plan. So it's an important item we felt, but didn't reach the level of criticality. And similarly, if you can get down a little, Ruth, to the next three or so, the Central Plateau F, G, and H, the T and B plants, this is part of the 5-year plan, and we talked about beginning removal actions of those 2 plants. I think those are both in the 200 area, and it's a pretty general statement, actually. I can't add to it at this point. True wastes are, in fact, the critical item. They have to be shipped off-site to Los Alamos, to WIP, Waste Isolation Pilot Plant in New Mexico. And this item is addressing the need to provide the engineering assessment and schedule for public review for the shipments. The shipments have been affected quite a bit by activities and incidents at the Waste Isolation Pilot Plant, which delayed their scheduling, required modifications. And Hanford wastes, as I understand it, are fairly low in the priority for shipment to that site. So we would like to shed more light on that for our information at Hanford as to when they are currently expected, and are we going to be prepared with documentation to get them there on that schedule. That's what that's addressing. Waste characterization is again the OUs is operating units designation, and the operating units that are mentioned there are the ones that are intended to either be initiated or to continue towards completion in the 5-year plan. Okay, river corridor, it's both what we just went through with Central Plateau cleanup. The river corridor cleanup and the Central Plateau cleanup basically fall within the RAP committee for HAB, but they're designated separately by DOE in the 5-year plan, so we've done that the same here. 324 building in river corridor cleanup is critical. I think everyone agrees with that. It's been on the top priority list, if you will, for the HAB as well as DOE for a number of years. We have worded this to say this is an acceleration of what the 5-year plan says by DOE currently. The DOE plan says, I believe, install micropiles or install, if you will, set micropiles to support the building so that excavation of the contaminated soil underneath the contaminated cell in that building can begin to be removed. This is saying complete required prep and begin remediation of the soils. In other words, it's an acceleration of what DOE has expected to do in 2024, because, in our view, because this is critical. It's within a stone's throw of the river in the 300 area, and it is extremely radioactive. The soil underneath it, this particular cell in the building, is extremely radioactive. So we feel all efforts should be made to accelerate this to completion. You mentioned, oh, sorry, Ruth, go ahead.
Yeah, Chris has his hand up.
I just wanted to cycle back on CP-H waste characterization. In EPA's presentation to the RAP committee, they talked about milestone M15, and they indicated that there had been tentative agreement to push milestone M15 out 10 years. That's characterization of all the waste trenches, of all the operable units described in M15. But then in the question comment period, Craig Cameron said that they wanted to go back and start redoing the RIFS work plan for WA1 because of the fact that they created a new operable unit with a lot of shallow waste management units in there that could be easily remediated without much characterization. So in EPA's mind, they want to start redoing the RIFS work plans, at least for one of those. And then in the life cycle cost diagram, it showed that all of these waste units are remediated, are completed in the next 5 years, which is exactly contrary to what we heard from EPA as a result of the milestone renegotiations. So I think we ought to leave it, but I just wanted to throw out that there's some conflicting information that's available that we've heard on this particular issue.
Okay.
Sounds
Okay.
like something that the IM team can run to ground.
Yes, for sure. Okay. The next one on groundwater cleanup, I'm going to skip over these fairly quickly because I'd like to get into the indirect ones. The groundwater cleanup is a critical item for Hanford cleanup. I think most people recognize that, and we're asking for expansion of the capabilities of the pump and treat facilities in this item, basically. The 100N record of decision, those words are added in here. That is in the 5-year plan. The DOE plans to complete the ROD for 100N. This item has been identified as installation of the apatite barrier, which is a radioactive barrier to be installed in the trenches around the drainage from 100N during operation. And that's been felt to be a critical part, but it's a part of the ROD. So the IM team reworded this to not focus on the apatite barrier, but focus on the ROD, because whatever is stated and approved in the ROD is what will ultimately have to happen at 100N. So we generalized it that way. And again, that's an important item. We didn't think that fell to the level of, or rose to the level of criticality. And the RCD is K West Basin, begin demolition, of the 105 K West Basin. That's, we have the question on, is it acceleration? I guess we'll have to look at that in the 5-year plan to see when they plan to do that. I can't recall, but we'll check that out. And whether or not it's an acceleration, I think it should be mentioned because it is
It's not an acceleration.
It's not, okay.
No.
Okay. Okay, Ruth, yeah, you might mention that. Thank you. Okay, indirect supporting activities. There are 4 or 5 items here that are kind of important to cover. The workforce issue, again, these are items that are not focused more on one committee or another. They're pretty much all committees. Workforce issues at Hanford, we've had a similar item in last year's advice, but we reworded this, and the main items here is that main focus here is that we want to develop a plan. We want to see an EPA ecology and actually a plan from DOE for how we're all going to participate in this workforce issue, which we feel is a large issue. Without having a trained and an adequate number of workforce folks, we're not going to get any work done, and critical work is going to slip, and we're going to lose emphasis and impetus in reaching objectives if we can't continue work at the various sites that we're talking about. So this has 3 sub-items. A, engage the workforce in workforce planning. We know that DOE depends on the primary contractor to do this, but we want to emphasize with DOE and the TPA agencies and get their concurrence that maybe more can be done in that regard. B is identify potential risks that require uninterrupted operations. If you train folks to, for example, 324, if you train folks in the mock-up and train them on the equipment to be used and train them in the processes and then start the excavation of this highly radioactive material under the cell, we don't want funding to interrupt that work because we want to maintain the direction and the pressure of that work to finish. And that's why the potential risk is identified here for identifying those sites that have to continue once they're started. And thirdly, make investments in the next generation workforce. This has a number of different aspects, some of which were defined in the previous advice 305 by the HAB. We don't know if there is an active plan to do things like, this is next generation workforce. So we're talking about bringing people into the Hanford area for cleanup, qualified people, motivated people, people that are really going to get this job done. And people and money are how this work is going to be completed at Hanford. Things like going to colleges and recruiting, creating an environment where people look upon Hanford employment as a preferred career, if you will, a preferred job, a preferred career. Whatever we can do in that regard, and there's a lot of potential activities. We're really talking about investments of those kinds of things that are required here.
All right, Max.
Yeah, thanks. This is a really important one for me too, and I'd say worker safety as well. My question, I'm curious if, well, it's important for DOE to have a workforce plan in place. Does anybody else think that this advice could also be directed towards ecology and EPA? Now, I know they have far fewer employees, but to make sure that EPA and ecology have the right people in place to make sure that they can do their work is a key piece of the puzzle. So I might ask a question or maybe even make a recommendation that this be brought into more than just DOE.
That's a good point. Yeah, that's a really good point. I'll make a note of that as well. To make we may have to reword the first sentence of that because this sentence says develop a plan for EPA, ecology, and the public. In other words, DOE is developing this plan alone. I see what your point is. Preferably, it would be a joint plan, but that might be too much to ask. Okay, we'll make a note of that and cover that. Good point, Max.
Ginger,
Oh,
let
sorry.
Ginger jump in, and I've got Esteban as well. Ginger?
I would also say that the Department of Ecology should be looking at the salary problem because we can't compete. We're paid roughly 30% less than folks on the other side of the fence. And it makes it difficult for us to keep the people after we train them, then they tend to leave us and go to DOE.
Ah, that's
All the
an
more reason
important
for a
item.
joint workforce plan.
A joint workforce plan, but also that the state needs to look at providing competitive salaries so that we can keep the people we train.
Definitely. Good
Esteban?
point.
Yeah, and I think it boils down to like what Tom said, and I think it just needs to be a joint venture between ecology, DOE, and EPA because, you know, my family is in Texas, coming from South Texas, and what happened, I think, on the topic of the evolution is that how these technical careers, and I think like down here you get what CBC, WC Tri-Cities, and you know the universities. How is that community investment in providing these career paths, right? Especially with kids that might, yeah, when it comes to PhDs and everything, but how is that community investment going to happen with the local governments? It starts like, you start a local government and everything. I remember, working for the census is that, you start first enumerating, right? Trying to take up, like mapping out basically what does the community involves and where are we gonna, need to put most of the resources. So that's a big thing. I think, like Tom mentioned, and with everything, I think needs to be a joint venture because I think Ginger just pointed it out how, yeah, there's that differential of salaries and everything, and how the state agencies work with the federal agencies.
Yeah, that's always it has been an issue. I agree, and salaries are certainly a key issue here. We'll kind of reword that. Yeah, I agree, Ruth, to a joint venture wording there. We'll adjust that for sure. Thank you for those comments. The second one is expand HAB and public involvement. These issues are primarily, well, they certainly involve everyone, but these are primarily in the realm of the PIC committee, and they've looked at this extensively. It's similar to what was mentioned last year in our advice with some changes. The first one is fully fund the board, including 6 full board meetings, with one being a regional meeting, and a full list of required or requested committee and issue manager meetings. In the past, and I don't know if it's still true this way, Ruth and Gary, but there have been a specific number of committee meetings that were supported by the contract between DOE and the facilitation team. And we occasionally ran into difficulties in having committee meetings assigned and had to instead do joint meetings for the committees, which counted as one meeting then for purposes of the contract. So we want to make sure that that doesn't become an issue again, and that the DOE considers increasing the funding that they provide for HAB activities.
Yeah, so the current contract does not have a cap on the number of either HAB meetings or board meetings. And it has always been silent on issue manager meetings. The way the fixed price portion works is we're managing by FTE. We're managing by staff hours.
Okay.
So that's, so we're no longer bean counting number of committee and HAB meetings.
Okay. Okay, that's
to go along with that, Tom, I'm sorry, to go along with that, to the IM teams, if you set it up yourself, those are completely unlimited.
Okay, maybe we can take out the wording after the comma in item A, ISAC sub-item A. If it's already covered, there's no reason to focus on full complement of committee and issue manager meetings. If that's not important, maybe we can drop that.
It doesn't come under the number limitation on the contract. What the potential limiting factor is staff hours.
Okay, there's still a limit then. It's just staff hours.
Yeah, it's a different kind of limit.
Okay, so we can maybe change that after the wording after the comma to say something about focusing on staff hours available for whatever.
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to stay neutral here, but the limiting fact, the guiding factor has changed under this contract from an absolute number of meetings to staff hours.
Okay. Okay, that's a really good point. We can change that wording. I'll work to adjust that wording in the front of item A. That's a good point. Fund regional public involvement meetings. I don't know if I don't think for the last several years, well, during COVID, I'm not sure what the status is of meetings. They've all been virtual, but prior to COVID, we were having some difficulty in scheduling regional meetings, such as in Hood River or Seattle or other locations around the site that may be impacted by Hanford. This item was meant to focus and not lose focus on the need for having regional meetings to involve the public beyond the Tri-Cities. I think the wording is okay as a simple wording as it's shown. But if you have comments, please let me know. Item C, reinstate travel reimbursement for alternates. DOE's made it pretty clear that that's not on their horizon, that the support. Some people will feel fairly strongly about it in the HAB. I'd like to leave this to the IM team. If you have any comments, feel free. The HAB would like to have this done, would like to have the reimbursement for alternates to go to meetings that are outside. Well, I shouldn't say that are just outside the Tri-Cities. People that are located outside the Tri-Cities, even coming to the Tri-Cities for meetings, the alternates are not funded for travel reimbursement. So that question has been an active one, and it remains that way. Item D is invest in technological improvements, and we added the wording, as Ruth indicates, to continue to grow capacity for virtual and technology-assisted participation in meetings. We now record all meetings, as you know, all these meetings are recorded by the facilitation team, and they are available for anyone to listen to. So there have been great strides in remote meetings for sure over the last 2 years, but we added the grow the capacity for those, for the participation, and we're not specific. So if you have specifics, we'd love to add them here. Otherwise, we'll leave it general that way.
All right, I've got Max and Chris in queue. Max.
Thanks. I would, and Tom, you might be right that this should go to the IM team, but a consideration for that sub D about technology is I'm anticipating that, well, who knows in COVID world, but optimistically, there may be in-person meetings this calendar year, 2022, maybe sooner rather than later, hard to say. But I would hope that a hybrid format could be offered for all future meetings, meaning a virtual as well as in person, because that helps people who, can't travel. It lowers costs. It lowers, vehicle miles on the road people are driving. And I think it helps access for people to access to meetings. It reduces the barrier. So I think that's pretty important. If that's something we can make a recommendation. I mean, I know it adds a technology wrinkle and probably a little more work on Ruth and the facilitation team and the IT folks, but it's important.
Right.
We haven't talked about it since yesterday.
It just maybe want to be the recommendation might be, there you go. Offer a hybrid format for all future meetings I think would be a good advice point.
Yeah, that's a really good suggestion, because I'm sure that's the way it's going to go, at least in the near term. It's great.
While I'm yakking, can I say one more thing about the suggestion for stipends for folks who don't have time off? That probably, I would suspect, is a Washington, D.C. headquarters kind of a thing, right? Even a congressional. authorization. I don't know if that's DOE local, but the state of Oregon, just for people's awareness, state of Oregon has very recently, just for awareness, has done this. State of Oregon offers a increased stipend to income qualifying people who serve on our state's boards and commissions. So there's a model that Oregon has put into place that the feds could look at, but I suspect this isn't a DOE local concern. Thank you.
Okay, Ruth captured that. That's good. That's good. Anyone else?
Chris is next up.
Okay.
Yes, in D about technology, there was some discussion, I think it was a RAP meeting, about having a virtual tour of Hanford. And everybody thought it was a good idea. And Gary volunteered to try and set it up. But that might be an example of how we could use technology to improve overall knowledge or familiarity of the site with HAB committee members and alternates.
You're saying virtual tours, that kind of thing?
Is that what?
Are you saying things like virtual tour availability?
Yeah, virtual tour of Hanford, the Hanford
Yeah.
site. Gary, do you want to add to that?
I was going to say that the virtual tours are open to the public right now.
Yeah.
And we are working on a plan to have a guided virtual tour. That's still in the early stages. And we tentatively have a virtual tour for the HAB set for, I think it's what, May 17th, the day of the committee of the whole. It's going to be quite a while before we get public tours back on site, but anybody can take a virtual tour right now.
Oh, Ruth, just noticed the confusion here, and we need to clarify this in the next format. Can you put a note for work for expanded on the title, expanded HAB and public involvement? Could you put a note that says correct the sub items designations? It shouldn't be ISA-C sub item A, and then it goes to sub item. It says A, B, C, D, and then there's a B down there. So we don't need that confusion. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, sounds good, guys. Let's get on to the last couple of these if we can. We're just about out of time, but Hanford funding support, this item is put in because there's a concern within the HAB, and it was mentioned during the October 20th public meeting on the 5-year plan and elsewhere in other committee meetings. Once we move into operations for DF Law, full operations of DF Law, a lot of money is going to be required to support that operation. And we're concerned that if we in fact continue to assume the base Hanford budget of 2.5 billion or thereabouts for combined ORP and RL, that a lot of that money, besides a chunk being taken out for critical maintenance, which is all required, there's going to be now a chunk taken out for operations, and the rest of the money, if not supplemented with a higher budget, is going to make the rest of cleanup at Hanford suffer. So this is saying where it says therefore it's requested that the DOE provide an engineering operational plan for review, public review, that defines how the existing assumptions of funding will be utilized to support both operations and to support the rest of cleanup. It's an important item. In fact, yeah, I'd be willing to make it critical, but right now it's listed as important. So the additional item, ensure RL is fully funded in addition to ORP funding. We wanted to make sure if there is going to be a continued distinction between RL and ORP like there is now, that both organizations are considered and not And when people talk about the overall Hanford budget of being 2.5 billion annually, potentially, we don't want to lose fact that there's two organizations that are going to be competing for that money. So that's why it's there. Any comment on that one?
I don't have anybody in queue.
Okay, it's an important item for sure. It's one that DOE may not be able to answer very well at this point, but it's worth highlighting. The last item, and we questioned this as the note on the side indicates, to the right side. This item was put in about infrastructure savings. We talked about, critical maintenance, min-safe operational support, that sort of thing, take a large part of the budget. We mentioned that in the paragraph before the table. This is saying we recognize that those activities are needed, but is there a better way to reduce that draw off of cleanup money, if you will, so that we have more money available within the given budget to apply to the cleanup functions themselves? We don't have very many specifics here, which makes it a little weak. The last sentence says, consider earlier remediation of contaminated waste sites, more effective management of site services to those sites, and other means. So I'm not sure what DOE can do with this without maybe more specificity. I don't know. I'm kind of torn myself between including this or not. I think it's worthwhile including as an important item, but I'd love to have some additional examples of what may be able to be done to reduce the draw off of money from the cleanup. If you have any now, or now for sure mention them, but even later, let Ruth and I know, and we'll try to factor that into the wording here so that it has more teeth, if you will, to more substance to this item.
Yeah, this item has been some version of it in what used to be known as budget advice for a lot of years. It used to be a big concern with PFP because we had guns and guards, and that was expensive. So the successful cleanup of PFP made a huge dent in this particular item. So yeah, we used to argue a lot about guns and guards.
Yeah. Guns and guards.
Guns and guards, that's what we called it. Chris.
Yeah, Tom, I think we should delete that item. You have your comment, should we delete it? And just, I think we should. As you say, I think it's this is ISA-E.
Yeah.
And I would say delete it. It's not very strong. And I think HMIS, I think they publish an infrastructure report and they update it on a regular basis. At least when I was working out there, there was a report that came out periodically that showed what they expected to do in the future and when they expected to do it. Gary, do you know if they are still publishing that infrastructure report or something analogous to it?
That report is still being published, and it's something that we are considering for a future briefing.
Good. That would be great. Maybe we could delete this. Let's leave it for the IM team, but I understand what you're saying, Chris. I'm kind of torn on concluding it or not because it is a little weak. Okay. Any closing comments from folks, particularly the BCC team that are on board, Dan or Steve or others that may have some final thoughts on this?
Max,
I'll just throw out one more thing. Maybe related to that last item, is there a consideration, maybe this is for the IM team, about recommending that DOE just maintain efforts to control costs and not, this is kind of specific around the site infrastructure and maybe I don't know. Maybe there's just something sort of a general statement that the HAB recommends DOE continue to do its best to manage cost containment, right? In budget constrained environments like everybody is, it's just a reasonable thing to do. And I'm sure they do their best to try it, but just keep their eyes on cost containment. Might be something.
Okay.
Okay.
We'll take a look at that.
We'll take a look at that.
Steve Anderson.
Yeah, Tom, I'm just kind of waiting for the IM team. I think I've voiced up what we have, but my few comments I think will be more appropriate for our team.
Okay, that's great, Steve.
Okay,
Thanks.
that's great, Steve. Thanks.
We're getting some echoing there.
Okay, so I'm going to mute everybody. And Susan Coleman, unmute yourself and jump in.
I know that in the past, the site contractor has been incentivized through the contract to reduce costs. I haven't looked at the latest site contract, HMS contract, but I know that, like I said, in the past, that has been part of that contract was to actively reduce site costs. And it should be it may be in section B of the contract, calling that out specifically. I would check just for the heck of it.
And Tom Galeotto, I muted everybody, included you. Sorry.
Sorry about that. Yeah, that's a good point, Susan. Maybe there's a rewording as opposed to a deletion completion completely on that ISA-E to focus on incentivizing cost reduction in general, not just on infrastructure. We'll talk about that. Good point. It is certainly something we should always keep in mind. All right. Okay. If there's no further comments at this point, again, if you have any other comments, please let Ruth and I know, and we'll make sure the IM team gets fed those comments and the ones that we've made today. And ultimately, the BCC will see this one last time, but hopefully it'll be just for a quick synopsis and an approval, because we have to meet with the BCC, meet meaning it may be a telephone call set up for the BCC in late February or very early March to say the IM team's done, it recommends this is the final draft. BCC has to approve that draft, and then it goes to Ruth for distribution to the HAB members for review at the March meeting. So you'll see it one more time, but at that point, we'd hope that we wouldn't have a lot of comments. So if you have comments yet now, please get them to us other than what's been made already today, and we'll attempt to address them. Okay, Ruth, where are we? We're at break.
We're at break. And there's a typo in the agenda. It's really 10:45, but yeah. Let's come back at 11. We have a hard stop at noon. We're going to talk a little bit about the life cycle report, questions on the membership packet, and committee business. So a full hour.
Yes.
So
yes, it is a full hour.
It is a full hour. So let's be back at 11 a.m.
See you then. Thank you. Do we have Ruth back yet?
Yeah, sorry. I was here. I just didn't undo my thing.
Okay. And Susan, I'm glad, I appreciate your comments earlier, and I didn't realize, I hadn't looked at the folks on the call. I'm glad you joined us today. It's great. So where are we? We are at the introduction to the life cycle report.
Correct. So you were going to do like a quick overview.
Yes. Do you have that file, or do you want me to share that file? It's like 3 or 4 quick slides. I'll just take a few minutes to go through them.
I don't have it. Do I have it? Did I miss it?
Well, I sent you a file yesterday in the email that you responded to. This was late yesterday, about 1 o'clock or so.
Oh, I was in the middle of the other meeting. Okay.
Right.
So my brain missed it. Here we go. Oh, here we go. I got it.
Okay, very briefly here on this item, I'd like to actually add for the April BCC meeting that we're talking about having during committee week. I'd like to add the topic of discussion for the life cycle scope schedule cost report. And in fact, to Gary, I'd like to request that DOE provide a briefing of that report if that's possible in that April meeting for us. What I'd like to show you today is only to whet your appetite, if you will, about this report and to give you a little bit of information as to what's involved. If we can share that, Ruth, I'll kind of quickly go through. These are slides, these are copies directly from the report of about 4 or 5 pages, and I won't go into detail with them, but with you on those. But I wanted to let you know they're there, and I think someone said during this call that, I think Chris, that you shared the life cycle scope schedule cost report on Teams, and if anyone's interested in getting a copy of that to look at, it would be worth looking at. This report is published every 3 years. It's published by DOE. And every time it comes out, it creates lots of consternation because of the length of time for Hanford cleanup and also the total dollars presumed to be needed for that cleanup. If we can go to the second slide, Ruth, I've just copied a couple of these of the main graphics that I think are the main graphics, at least. On this one, it shows that they typically publish a low range estimate. In this case, you see the top chart, the total low range activity from this day forward. In other words, not in the past, starting now, what's it going to cost us? $300 billion. That's if everything goes as expected with no major perturbations, and we can get the cleanup here in 2078 with continued, if you will, I'll call it maintenance level, but continued monitoring activities and wrap-up activities at a fairly low level after 2008. So until, well, to the end of the century, basically. But what the concern here is the peaks. And okay, we're looking at the high level. The low is 300 billion to the top right of that chart. Looking at the next chart, if things don't quite go as planned, it could go up to 640 billion. I mean, that's doubled. So between almost doubled or more. So and you see this is if things don't go well and various assumptions are made, which are in great detail in this report, that things may not go well, and if it requires a shift in operations or a delay, these are the funds that are needed. So the same cleanup work could cost now up to 640 billion instead of 300 billion. Huge numbers. We're talking between 2023 and mainly 2078. This show, well, this is an extension now. If things go well, activities normally ended at 2078. If things don't quite go well, it extends out to another almost 10 years, 9 or 10 years at a higher level. But the problem that this is highlighting is we are currently, for the last few years, running between $2 and $2.5 billion annual funding. And if you go across to the left margin here and see where we are with 2022, the need is actually above $3 billion per year for this year, for 2022. Well, we don't have $3 billion. And then it goes rapidly up to a peak of over $7 billion and so forth. So you see these very, very high annual numbers that don't look realistic in the current funding situation that we're getting for Hanford. That's a concern. Okay, if you can skip that chart now completely and go to the next page, Ruth. I just wanted to point out that's the magnitude of the issue. This is the breakdown of the different WBSs, or Project Work Scope, PWS. You'll see a number of acronyms, and someone mentioned this earlier. The first line talks about a PBS, Project Baseline Summary. So this is all work plan, work package related, the breakdown of costs. But the estimated cleanup costs on the right column for each of these packages gives you the range between the low range and the high range. And if you look down about 2/3 of the way down, the DOE Office of Environmental Management remaining estimated cleanup, it estimates 293 to 633. When you add the long-term stewardship in, if you will, the efforts beyond, I guess beyond 2078. Yeah, 20, yeah. It adds to 300 and 640. This is the breakdown of how those costs go. And the main line here is the one in the middle, radioactive liquid tank waste stabilization and disposition. That's the lion's share of the total dollars and the difference in dollars between the low and high range. So it goes from, in essence, 200 billion to, in essence, 500 billion just for that, the handling of the tank waste. So obviously that's the key to the whole Hanford cleanup funding picture. Okay, if you go to the next one, Ruth, again, we're just going through these quickly. This provides a quick graphic schedule between the categories that were mentioned in the 5-year plan: river corridor cleanup, central plateau cleanup, and tank waste cleanup. The fourth one that's missing is indirect and supporting activities, but these are the three that are identified in the 5-year plan, and you see the schedule for each of them. Central Plateau goes even beyond the tank waste cleanup, but the tank waste cleanup is again the funding beast that we need to feed. Okay, next one, Ruth, the final one, I think it is. Oh, I got one other one, but this just gives you a different graphic of the split between RL and ORP for the money. And again, the low range at the top of 300 billion on the left, high range 640, and it shows the piece of the pie that's RL and the piece of the pie that's ORP, with the tank waste being, of course, in the ORP section. And I'm not sure I can't read the graphic title of that lower one, but it shows you the picture combined between ORP and RL being in the blue and ORP in red. That shows you the magnitude of the challenge for funding. That's basically my message to you. It's a huge challenge. This I threw in because I thought it was really a cool chart. The figure is figure 5.1 in the report. This is the life cycle report again. And without going through the details at all on this, because I haven't really gone through it at all myself, it shows you the flow of materials and how the waste treatment is going to be handled. I thought that was very informative, actually. And it puts some pieces together that you might question how one thing fits into the other. So that's my briefing. The message that I have, two things I'd like to leave you with. One is I would like to talk to, not this chart, but the life cycle report in detail if we can, from a DOE presentation in April, if that were at all possible. And if that wasn't possible, I'd still like to have that on the agenda for us to discuss it in detail as part of the BCC, because it is critical to the overall Hanford cleanup. The other message is that it comes from a comment that was made in one of the earlier committee meetings this week by one of the TPA agency reps. This report is putting together schedule, assuming that the scope of the cleanup is set, is putting together two factors that are variable: schedule and cost. And as one changes, the other changes inversely. So if the schedule extends, I shouldn't say inversely necessarily there, as a schedule extends out for various reasons of delays or technical issues, the cost goes up in that case from these criteria. If the schedule goes down, meaning you're trying to clean up faster, the cost is going to go up also. Conversely, if it's dependent completely upon the budget, and my feeling is because of this magnitude of budget, that's the bigger factor here. If we don't get the budget that's laid out, if our budget is lower than anticipated in this report, to me, that schedule increases dramatically. If we increase the budget to at least the level it's shown in this report, we can meet the schedule supposedly. If we increase the budget even more, maybe even we can beat that schedule. We can clean up faster. But that funding picture is critical, and at this point, there's not seeming to be a lot we can do about that. But I'm really interested in getting your feedback in April about your level of concern about these budget numbers and schedule picture and how those two interrelate. So that's my tease. If you would look at that report, take some time to look at it between now and April, I'd appreciate that, because I'd like to get into this more in detail. It's a critical issue for Hanford cleanup overall. That's all I have with that, Ruth. Unless there's a question that I can address at this point.
Chris has got his hand up.
Oh, okay.
Chris and then Esteban.
Okay. Gary, I have a question for you. And this is out of curiosity. Was this report put together by RL and ORP personnel, or did DOE hire a contractor to put the report together? Because I know in the past that kind of some reports like this, DOE has hired agencies like the Army Corps of Engineers to oversee and do it. And I just wondered if an outside contractor contracted directly to DOE as opposed to one of the prime contractors put the report together.
I don't have an answer for you on that, Chris, but I will ask.
Okay, thank you.
Esteban.
And I think that's the key phrase that Tom just mentioned. And as a person who's worked in campaigns, and before I was here and came to Washington State, I was in Washington, D.C. working for a science nonprofit. And then how I think, how our democracy works, that's a big thing, to me, and as a person, I think trying to get that public message out. And then, like, I think, and as a person that's out in the field, trying to organize all the parties involved, that at the end, if we all don't pull together for this, like Tom said, it's just going to delay the work and the process. At the end, that's why when I mentioned common sense, that's like the common goal, right? Hey, we got to get this work done. But yet, if people are not informed, and the agencies, federal, state, and everybody in the cities, that's what puts the delay in, like what Tom said, and everything that's happening at Hanford. And that's, it's like, what is it? And I was a machinist in the Navy, and I worked in the engine room. It's like, it takes so well, Hojo, the 4 engine rooms. I was still in a steam aircraft carrier to get it moving right. If we didn't have enough the engine rooms doing the work, guess what? This thing was, the 4 rudders weren't going to propel the ship forward. So guess what? If we all don't get on the same page, that's my biggest concern. Like Tom said, is like that too, and then, with politics or political leaders and everything, and the public opinion, to me, that's my biggest concern, that, trying to kind of do that work and engaging everybody to see those goals that everybody's trying to accomplish, especially people on this board.
Good point. I certainly agree with that. Esteban. I'm hopeful we'll get some more insight and have some lively discussions in April on this. It's an important report. So, thank you. Any other comments, Ruth? Oh, sorry.
Yes. Yeah, I was going to say one of the taglines that Brian Vance likes to use a lot is virtuous circle. And basically what that means is we do as good a work as we possibly can, as efficiently and as compliantly as we can with the money that we're given. Then we tell the public this is what we've done, tell and show the public what we've done. That engenders support for what it is that we're trying to do out at Hanford. The political leaders, the budget folks say, yes, that's a good investment. And then that in turn gives us the dollars to be able to do the work, to engender the support, to get the dollars. So yeah, everybody's right on target. It's going to take a lot of effort, and it's got to start with DOE doing the good work, which is what we're doing.
True. That's what we're all striving for. The end goal is to clean up, and that's great. That is true. Okay, Ruth, I think we're ready for Gary again.
Right. So given that committee business is actually going to take more than 15 minutes, I'm going to suggest for the membership packet item, because it's been on all of the committee agendas this week, so some of you have probably heard pieces already. Why don't we open it up to clarifying questions instead of Gary going through his thing again? I didn't ask Gary if this was okay, but that might buy us some time so you can actually get through committee business before high noon.
Okay.
Yes, and I'd really like to leave plenty of time for committee business. So probably what I can do is respond to a couple of the questions that I've had over the past couple of days about a plan. And that is one of the things that I'm working on, to try to put it on paper so that people can see what it is that we're really trying to do. I've done a lot of talking, and now I need to do some showing. So I'm working on putting that plan on paper, and those who are who attend the EIC, hopefully I will have something to show next week. That's my goal, and or at least the draft of the plan, and then to continue to move forward and show the plan and as we implement the plan. And I guess I will just go on and take questions at this point.
Anyone? I don't have anyone in queue.
Ruth, if I can enter a comment here or a question for Gary, maybe.
Yeah.
This is a comment for the BCC that may not have been introduced to this subject very briefly. DOE headquarters has presented a case for membership packets for ultimate approval for the HAB and other EMSSABs that involve a lot of criteria for the potential members and how long or how the diversity issue is handled and improved upon, and term limit issues are in question. And there is a movement right now by the HAB to discuss at the EIC meeting when it comes up. I guess it's next week, to consider whether or not we want to submit advice on this item, because it's considered as a critical item for continued functionability and benefit of the HAB. So once that's decided, if there is or is not going to be advice, the issue will be opened up for IMT members to join that committee if you're interested, and ultimately you will, if it goes forward, you'll see it in the March meeting for the HAB.
So for new members, that goes back to the process that IM teams are commissioned by a committee, and draft advice has to be approved by a committee before it goes to the full board. So that's why what Tom said, that's the logic path behind that. Susan Coleman.
Hey, Gary, I don't know if this is the appropriate time or place, but in the colleges section, I really think we need to include CBC because they have a much more diverse population than the other two universities. The other two universities aren't bad, but CBC has an incredibly diverse population.
Susan, I appreciate the comment, and that is actually something that's on the table. Not only do you have the diversity issue there with CBC, we've also got several Hanford workforce pipeline related projects and programs there.
Right.
And we've also had partnerships with CBC where our lab technicians did a lot of training out there before we were able to get the analytical lab built out on site, and those folks transferred out. We've got a lot of outreach there. So adding CBC at a time makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and the welding program was really big too. So it's, yeah, Hanford has had a long relationship with CBC. So to not have them on the list, that was one of the big surprises for me when I came onto the board and saw the initial list. So it just it's a no-brainer to me.
Ginger.
Very good.
Oops, there I am. I think that Eastern and Heritage College should also be, if we're listing schools to do outreach to, then Heritage should probably also be at the top of the list because it's closer and also serves both a large Latino and the Native American population.
Virtual high fives again to you, Ginger. We're on the same wavelength on that.
Other questions for Gary? All right, stay tuned for more information.
You mean I'm actually giving back some time? Wow.
Yeah, well, there's a lot under committee business.
Yeah, we appreciate that, Gary.
You bet.
Okay, so committee business is up, huh?
Committee business is up, and you wanted to go through action items, correct?
Yeah, to save some time, if I have a couple items that I've tried to note in my rambling notes from this meeting today to do, and I have two here that I've identified, hopefully for Gary, but I'd like to go through these quickly too. Some of these don't matter anymore because we've passed the time of interest. So let's go through those rather quickly, and we can add a couple that we may have to add this meeting. The Idaho does the Idaho EMSSAB have similar concerns? I think we can cancel that. I think that the concern about that was past. It was active at that time, but I don't think we need to follow up on that. Provide details on key personnel involved in budget and program reviews. This is DOE EM personnel. I would really like to see that, actually. And if we can follow up, still needs follow-up, I'd appreciate that. To know who's involved. Again, I know there's been hesitation to get into budgets, but I think we're more and more, based on this life cycle report, for example, we're going to be getting more into budgets, even though it's not part of this action advice item that we're dealing with today. Number 3, identify the proper way to transmit budget sharing chart. That's okay. That was decided to not submit advice on that. So that's closed. That was decided last last October, as I recall. Number 4, DOE to review, comment, concur with HAB budget. Okay, that's also closed. Decided we didn't need follow-up. I think Gary, actually, I take that back. It is closed, but you might add the note in front of that Gary did follow up with his management. Number 5, provide the most recent budget guidance memorandum. Gary did provide that. That's closed. It's provided. Yeah, you might say Gary provided it. That's good because it's a closed item. Determine how the HAB members can access public budget info. You might reassign that to me. It's unassigned, and I can only go so far with that, but I'll take a shot at that, maybe with some help from other BCC members that might know. I can put together something for the BCC that will guide us into how we can access budget information. So I'll look more into that. Number 7. I think Chris did this. You uploaded the comparison evaluation between what was required in 309, what was suggested in 309 advice, which was the previous cleanup advice, and the cleanup priorities from that wording is not quite making sense to me. Comparison evaluation between the 309 advice from the public meeting. That was 7:15 is the public meeting. Yeah, okay, that's completed. That is completed. Number 8, investigate milestone 36 requiring life cycle evaluation. That's clearly being done. We just got another life cycle report, so that is every 3 years, and that's complete. Number 9, confirm the DOE includes a copy of our cleanup priorities advice with their annual budget submittal to headquarters. I don't know how we confirm that. Gary, I guess, can you confirm that, Gary? We've been told that, but I guess we never see that submittal because of embargoing of information. We're not allowed to see that submittal. So if you could just tell us, yes, it's done, we can close that item. If you know.
I sent that to headquarters myself.
Oh, okay.
And it's aggregated and then sent on to parts unknown to me.
Okay,
I'm
no, that's
assuming
great.
it makes it to OMB, but I am the one who pushed the button to send it to headquarters.
I remember you commenting on that now by email. I'm glad you mentioned that. Yeah, that's closed too. That's good.
Yep.
Tom Fletcher mentioned that Savannah River was receiving, I don't know what the rest of that item says, Ruth. Oh, there, culture, workforce issues. Okay, email exchanged. I guess I don't know if there's any update on that. This dates back a few months, 4 months or so. Let's leave it open. I would like a follow-up with Tom Fletcher on that, because the workforce issues, as we've talked about today, are quite important for us, continuing to be important. The number 11 BCC call. Oh, that's done. Yeah, the call was held, the agenda was provided, and that's finished. That's closed. And I have 2. Unfortunately, Gary, they have your name on them, but if you agree, we can add 2 today and see if there's any others that people have mentioned. The one was, let me get back to my notes. The one was that you could check regarding a public comment, and I think you already did that. February 15th, April 15th is the public comment for the life cycle report. Okay, that's not an action. We know that. And so we'll plan on that. I guess that because it was on the chart that Ruth had shown earlier as an item for public comment, we can depend on that close date of the 6th, where was it, April 15th, to be valid, to get our comments in after our April meeting of the life cycle report. So if we have any comments, we can get them submitted within that time period. So that's good. There's no action there.
So,
for you.
clarification, those are individual comments. Committees cannot, and issue manager teams cannot issue comments on behalf of the board or an IM team or a committee.
Okay, let's add an action for me then to clarify with the EIC the best way to get comments on the life cycle schedule cost, scope schedule cost report. LCSSC is what it is. Life cycle scope schedule cost report. How we can best get those comments to DOE. I'll take that action. And maybe, in fact, if we have time to do it next week at the EIC meeting, I'll broach that subject then. And the
Yeah, Tom?
other, yes.
Yeah, given the time schedule that we're looking at on this, it's probably going to be very difficult to get HAB advice or comments in on that. Probably the easiest way is for folks as private individuals to send in comments during that time period.
Okay, I understand, Gary. In fact, that's typically what we've done. The BCC has done in commenting on draft contract requests for contract quotes for the Hanford site. We've never had the time to get full HAB consensus approval of those comments. So typically the BCC or whoever would have individual comments would send them in by email to DOE as a private citizen. We may have to do that. That's probably a good point.
Just
ahead.
make sure on the letter that it doesn't say members of a committee or members of an IM team. That will trigger kerfuffles that are best avoided.
Okay. Okay, that's understood.
End of nag. Chris, I saw your hand.
And the only other action I did have for hopefully Gary is a question from Chris on what organization put together the scope schedule cost report, life cycle report. Was it DOE locally or a contractor or someone else? That'd be helpful to know.
If I had to hazard a guess, I would say it was probably contracted, but I don't know. I will ask the question.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I think that's for that item on the action list. I think that's wrapped up, Ruth, for today. If we can add, I'm sorry, for you and Josh, could you add that update to the action plan, including the additional action plus the updates on the status in the minutes?
Yeah, I am sending it to Josh right now because then I won't forget. There. Okay, it's on its way, Josh.
Okay, so the next topic on the agenda is part of this business is what?
We have HAB committee restructuring and next meeting topics.
Okay. Yeah, I just wanted to mention on the restructuring. Gary, we just talked about this on I'm getting the two confused. No, this was not mentioned. On the committee restructuring, there has been an issue raised on whether or not this is the right time to look at how our committees on the HAB are laid out, the identification of them, the scope of their activities. Does it fit now with the current mission of cleanup and the current status of cleanup at Hanford? And currently we have 2 technical committees, the RAP and tank wastes. And we have 3 supporting committees, the PIC for public involvement, the HSEP for safety related issues, and the Budget and Contract Committee. There's been a question raised, does that layout of committees, the 5 committees, plus the EIC is a 6th committee, but do these 5 committees adequately address the needs of Hanford cleanup going forward for the HAB structure? We haven't gotten into this discussion much in detail, I'll say, at the EIC. There's been mention of it for sure. There's some discussion, but it's been put off for a while. But there's been some initial thoughts, and there is some initial thoughts that we may end up as a HAB, combining 2 or 3 of the committees into one to make the structure simpler and more and less unwieldy, if you will, in terms of setting up meetings, responding to comments, and so forth. I just wanted to highlight in this item here that this is going on. You know, some of the BCC members, probably most of the BCC members, don't have haven't had any exposure to this item yet. So I wanted to tell you it's on the table. It's being considered. It is the reason for it is we're getting into a new phase here of operations, dominant operations at Hanford. At least we will be soon, and we wanted to just check in to make sure we're still structured properly to provide our advice and input to DOE. So that's on the table. Any questions I can answer, which are probably none, but I'd be interested in hearing your questions about it. And you'll hear more about this in the future, probably at the March meeting and then later on in the summer.
Chris. Chris.
Yeah, Tom, this is the first I've heard about it, and I've been attending all the meetings for a long time. Is this being driven by DOE or by the HAB Executive Committee or who?
Yeah, I think it's a combination. The initial idea, as I understand, was between DOE and our HAB leadership, Steve, and maybe others that I'm not aware of. But where it's been discussed primarily that I'm aware of, and it hasn't been extensively discussed by any means, but it has been discussed, and there's been some suggestions from the EIC, and then a couple members of the EIC have taken it a little further to put together some charts on responsibilities of committees and how they might fit together. But there's been no decisions, no clear direction, just some thoughts. I guess that's the way I would characterize it, Gary. Do you agree with that?
Yes, and in fact, this is something that's actually coming from multiple angles, because the Tank Waste Committee and RAP have tried to discuss really where their lines are and what tasks they share. So there are multiple angles that are kind of driving this discussion. And at the end of the day, everybody may decide that the HAB is fine just the way it is. So that this is an examination, not a decision. And but having that conversation is important.
Yeah, no one, Chris, to identify maybe your underlying concern. No one has made any decisions at all, as far as I've heard, on any of this. I just bring it up here for your general information and not to be shocked and surprised when you maybe first hear about it in whenever, March or later in the summer. But your input, all of the HAB members' input, will be needed in any final decision or recommendation by the HAB. You're not, no one in the HAB is being kept out of this. It's just an idea that's still being kicked around and see if it has any traction. Okay, if there's no other comments on that, we can talk about the topics coming up for the next meeting. And again, Ruth, I would suggest a meeting in the committee week in April. So whatever that date is that we have the BCC schedule for, that we should schedule that.
Yeah, we deliberately scheduled this meeting on Thursday, this committee week, because of the gathering input on the cleanup priority advice from other committees. Depending on what the needs are for BCC, PIC, and HSEP, we sort of choreograph the Monday and Thursday of committee week. So
Okay, and that week is April 10th.
correct. So you would either meet the 11th or the 14th, depending on the other requests.
Okay.
And the flow of topics. I mean, if committees have topics that need to flow between committees, we'll choreograph that.
Okay, very good. Yeah, and the topic for that meeting, well, one will be the life cycle report. And if we can have a presentation, if Gary can check on the potential presentation, or at least briefing of the life cycle report to our group, then that would be great at that meeting, because that would lead into our discussion that would make it more fruitful. But if not, even if not, I think we need to include that on the agenda for our discussion. We will also, I'd like to go over the work plan for next year to get some ideas, the summary of this year, 2022 work plan, and also suggestions for the 2023 work plan, because the leadership meeting that is for the EIC members that occurs this year in May, is it?
Okay.
We usually try to draft up, we will be drafting up the first cut at the fiscal 2023 work plan for the BCC, and I'd like to have the knowledge of your input when we do that. So April, in our meeting in April for the BCC, it'd be a great time to try to pull our ideas together and make sure we're covered as a committee on how we're going to do that. The other item is we will be voting in April. That should be a meeting topic agenda for the chair and vice chair of the committee going forward. As some of you may not be aware at this point, if you're new members to the HAB, the leadership of the committees change every year. Or, I'm sorry, don't change. The vote, there's a vote each year for the chair and the vice chair of each committee. And it's usually in the February timeframe. This year, for various reasons, we're going to plan on doing it in April, as we've discussed earlier. And so that's the reason. And it's a typical schedule item for the committees to deal with. Any other thoughts on what you'd like to talk about as the BCC for our April meeting? I know I'm probably forgetting something there, but we had some topics in the past. Gary, maybe you can answer this. We had 3 topics requested for presentations today, but they weren't able to be supported by the by DOE for our meeting today. But I'm wondering if there's any potential for them. And one is for April. One was end state contracting, and we've provided detailed framing questions in the past on these. Another is a briefing of the 2024 budget public meeting. If that's going to be held in March, then we don't need that in April, because that we will have already heard that item, that discussion by DOE in a public meeting. So the end state contracting would still be certainly desirable if we can do it. Also, I don't know, we have listed an item on DOE work control system description, earned value, finance reporting, and work breakdown structure information, so that our BCC can have a better feel for how does the $2.5 billion annual budget get split in between ORL and ORP and RL, and further into the various work packages that follow that control each of those pieces of money. That might be helpful to get as a it's not a 101 kind of briefing. It's much more than that. It's a more of an explanation of the dissemination, distribution, and split of the budget, and how that's done in Hanford. If that was possible, that'd be a great topic. So between that topic and the life cycle potential presentation and the in-state presentation, if you could check on the potential for those presentations, that'd be great for us.
I'll take them forward.
Okay, thank you, Gary. Okay, any other comments, Ruth, that you have on chat, or?
I don't have anybody in queue.
No hands raised. Everybody's either completely satisfied or gone to sleep.
Right.
Not sure which.
And I didn't send coffee and muffins to everybody this morning. So.
Oh, darn. That's right. Okay, I guess we can close. Gosh, we saved some time again today. We're just too efficient, I guess. I appreciate all your time. I really do. I know it's been nearly 3 hours, and I think it's very productive 3 hours. We'll take these comments back, particularly on the advice, to the IM team, and we'll get those considered and developed into the final draft of that advice that you will see in a meeting we've yet to set up, a call we've yet to set up with the BCC. It is tentatively shown on our IM team schedule as being about March 2nd, but that may change. If we are able to get the advice through the IM team, blessed through the IM team before the plan on the schedule, we'll try to schedule the call with the BCC to verify that that's the final draft and the BCC members are acceptable to that. We'll let you know that. So as soon as we know after the IM team call, we'll schedule this meeting with the BCC, and hopefully you can attend. Hopefully you'll like the product, because your approval will be required, or comments made.
Thank you.
Thank you all again. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you, Tom.
You bet. See you all later.
Thanks,
Have a
Tom.
great
Good
day.
job.
Have a great